Happy New Year 2025 from Park Rapids, Minnesota. I am praying that you have a blessed year, that it's filled to overflowing with blessings from God, because you know what you're supposed to do with overflowing blessings? You're not supposed to hoard them. We've spread them around to others. So let's spread those blessings to our neighbors, our families, our friends, the people in our communities, the people on the other side of the world even, sharing the blessings that God has given to each one of us. I pray that this year finds you growing. And growth doesn't come without challenges, so I know there'll be those in your year, but I also believe that there'll be God there helping you to overcome each of those challenges. So I'm just praying for your best year that God has prepared for you, all to His glory. And so today, we're going to start with a question. Do you suffer from 2 syndrome? And you say, what is 2 syndrome? Yeah, I probably have a syndrome, maybe even have 2 of them. But when I say 2, I don't mean the number 2. I mean TOO, also. The 2 or also syndrome. The idea of, and even more than also, the idea of too much. So, and I don't mean that you've been blessed with too much. We just talked about that, because if you're blessed with too much, you need to be sharing that with others. So what's this 2 syndrome I'm talking about? Well, it's when we start thinking we're too something. That we can't do something because you're too short or too tall. You're too ignorant. You're too intelligent. You're too whatever it happens to be. And I specifically am thinking about today, age. I think of too old or too young. And I think that's something that hinders a lot of us. This 2 syndrome, and specifically about our age. The reality is, the question, do you think you're too old? And to be honest, I mean, you see this up here? Sometimes I feel too old. Sometimes I feel like, I turned 60 this last summer. And scientists say that there are 2 major aging periods in our life. I've hit both of them now. First one is around age 44. Not sure the significance of that, but right around age 44, we have a molecular aging that takes place in the body, significant changes. Second one takes place right around age 60. And I can vouch for that. I really felt it this year. I felt that age. And so, sometimes it's easy for that enemy. We talked about spiritual warfare a few weeks ago. It's easy for him to whisper in our ear, you're getting too old. You're getting too old to do what God needs you to do. You're getting too old to be His servant. You're getting too old. God can't use you anymore. The church doesn't need you anymore. Those are lies that the enemy is whispering to you. So again, the question, do you think you are too old? In fact, I believe that's what David was talking about in the Psalms. In Psalm 71 and verse 9, he prays this prayer. He sings this praise to God. Don't throw me aside when I am old. Don't desert me when my strength is gone. And I'm sure there's many of you that can relate to that. As I said, I'm getting to that point where I relate. I can relate to what David was saying when he says, don't see me as useless because I'm old. Don't throw me away because I can't do what I used to be able to do. And so I want you to consider this. The idea of the age, America is growing older. This is a reality. Here, listen to this. This is in the United States. In 1850, So we're talking a little over 150, actually about 175 years ago now. 175 years ago, the average life expectancy for people in the United States was 40 years. Now, yes, there were people who lived longer than that, but that was the average life expectancy in 1850. Which means that many of you that might be listening to this, and I know in my congregation, have lived 2 lifetimes. But you know what? Today, the average is around 79 years and increasing. And now listen, I know there's going to be people that tell you, well, that's not true, that it's not increasing, that the life expectancy in this country is going down. Well, that was true a few years ago. During the pandemic, life expectancy took a major dip. But going back, I have statistics that I shared a similar lesson to this to the nursing home, residents of the nursing home. Exactly, it was about 20 years ago. And the average life expectancy at that time was 70 years. And so we've almost increased, we've increased at least 9 or about 9 years. And actually, there was a little dip where it dropped fairly drastically, several years. That the drop was, 2 or 3 years of life expectancy during the pandemic period, and then now it's slowly going back up again. And so the reality is, you think of that. Life expectancy in the last 20 years has increased almost 10 years. Now I want you also to consider this. That trend can't continue much longer. At some point, we're going to get where we can't expect in another 50 years that the life expectancy is going to be 100. Not realistic. But I want you to realize when we are aging, and like I say, right around 80 years is the average life expectancy now in our country. Others, might be higher or lower, but that's in the United States. And so I want you to consider this about the idea of not too old. So I want you to think about you're not too old. You see, Benjamin Franklin, one of our founding fathers of this country, was not too old to be part of the 1787 Constitutional Convention. At the age, he was the oldest member, at the age of 81 years old. Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister, who was the Prime Minister of Great Britain, was not too old to win a Nobel Prize in Literature at the age of 79. Anna Mary Robertson Moses, probably you don't recognize that name. She was not too old to start painting at 76 years old when her hands became too crippled from arthritis to embroider, which she loved to do. So, Grandma Moses, you probably recognize that name, became one of our country's most well-known artists of that generation. Consider Laura Ingalls Wilder of Little House on the Prairie fame. Laura Ingalls Wilder was not too old to publish the first of 9 Little House on the Prairie books at 64 years old. Ray Kroc. Some of you may not recognize that name, but you'll recognize the business, the franchise that he started. He was not too old at age 59 to buy the McDonald's hamburger restaurant, and there was a couple of them, and turn it into the largest food franchise in the world. So obviously, McDonald's. We've all been there. We've seen them. They're all around the world. Ray Kroc saw the power of a hamburger stand that was run really well. He was actually selling them milkshakes and thought, this is a great stand. Let's multiply this. Let's franchise it. Came up with the idea, bought out the brothers, the McDonald brothers, and the rest is history. 59 years old. But those are, our examples that we can look at in our world and in history. But let's look at a couple Bible examples, because God includes some stories, messages about people who are older that accomplish great things for him. First examples found in Genesis 21 and verse 5. Abraham, it says, was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born. Now, if you remember, he was 75, which is very old even at that time, and was promised. He was childless, and they couldn't have children. And he said, God tells him, you're going to become the father of a great nation. And he's like, but I don't have any kids. And, God's saying, trust me. And it took 25 years now. There were some points where Abraham doubted, took things into his own hand, but God came through. And when he was 100 and his wife Sarah was 90, they had a son, Isaac, and they became the parents of a great nation, Israel. So Abraham fathered a nation at 100. Pretty amazing. Not too old, was he? Exodus chapter 7 and verse 7. We have the story of Moses and his brother Aaron. Moses, if you remember, grew up in Pharaoh's household in Egypt, trained as a prince of Egypt. But because he saw the abuse that was being heaped upon his people, the Hebrews, and he stood up for one and killed a taskmaster. He became a fugitive, lived another 40 years in the land of Midian as a fugitive and as a shepherd. And remember the burning bush? God calls him and says, go back and talk to Pharaoh and bring my people out. Listen to what Exodus 7 verse 7 says. Exodus 7 verse 7 says, Moses was 80 years old and Aaron was 83 when they talked to Pharaoh. So here we have an 80-year-old man and his 83-year-old brother that come to Pharaoh and said that iconic message. God says, let my people go. And then we have the story of the plagues. Pharaoh kicks them out. The story of the Red Sea, all of that, wandering in the wilderness. Moses continues to lead the people, the rebellious people, the people that weren't learning to trust God. Moses led them for 40 years in the wilderness to the point of leading them up to the promised land when he was 120 years old. So from 80 to 120, Moses led the children of Israel. Not too old, was he? So Moses led Israel out of Egypt at 80. And so being older doesn't mean we are too old. Yes, we are older, but we're never too old. So now we're going to flip, because again, the idea, the title of this message is, does age matter? So do you think you're too old? Maybe. But the flip side is, are you told you're too young? And I know there's some of you that are younger. Some that are teenagers, young people, early 20s, college age, and you get the message, you're too young. And the reality is, God has a message for you. So in 1 Timothy 4:12, Paul, writing to a young preacher by the name of Timothy, and this is what he encourages Timothy. He says, don't let anyone treat you as if you are unimportant. This is 1 Timothy 4:12. Don't let anyone treat you as if you are unimportant because you are young. Instead, be an example to the believers with your words, your actions, your love, your faith, and your pure life. Paul says, yes, you're young, but don't let people tell you you're too young. Don't let people tell you you're unimportant because you're not older, because you don't have experience, because you haven't done or learned the things that maybe they have. Don't let people feed you the line because you're young, you are unimportant. So again, too young, or actually not too young. Not too young. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, one of the greatest composers of all time, a musical genius. He was not too young when he wrote his first symphony at, guess what? 8 years old. Malala Yousafzai. Malala Yousafzai, Pakistani girl, was not too young at age 11 to begin advocating for the education of females in the Muslim-controlled country of Pakistan, where she grew up. At age 14, if you remember this in the news, a gunman burst onto her school bus, and shot her in the head because of that activism, because of what she was doing advocating for education for females. But she survived and continued her work. She was not too young to receive the Nobel Peace Prize at 17 years old. That's a recent example. What about Louis Braille? We've all heard of Braille. He was not too young at the age of 15 to help develop the reading and writing system for the blind, which now bears his name. So obviously, he came up with Braille, and at the age of 15. Now, he built off of someone else's idea, but he came up with this system because he, because of an accident, had become blind when he was a child. Another example, Joan of Arc. Was not too young at 17 years old when she became a French military leader and encourager and helped win battles and wars, and sadly was martyred at 19. Blaise Pascal, some of you may have read of some of his quotes or books. He was a famous mathematician as well as a Christian. Blaise Pascal was not too young to invent the first mechanical digital calculator. You know what year it was? 1642. Now, we're not talking about electronics here, but it was still a calculator, and he was just 18 years old. Mary Shelley was not too young to begin writing her novel, Frankenstein, when she was just 18 years old. It was published when she was 20. And so we have example after example of people that were not advanced in age doing amazing things, different kinds of things. And so, you've got Mary Shelley writing a book and having it published when she's 18 to 20, and Laura Ingalls Wilder, who is 64 when she publishes her first book. Opposite ends of the spectrum, but both equally successful. And so the point I want you to get is you're not too young. In fact, there's some Bible examples. Look at 1 Samuel 7. This obvious one of the first that comes to mind. 1 Samuel 17, 32 and 33. 1 Samuel 17, 32 and 33. Here we have the story of David. David and Goliath. You remember that. He goes out to visit his brothers, actually delivering them food, sees Goliath out there, is just outraged that no one's doing something about this giant out there yelling terrible things about God and about his people, and no one's accepting his challenge. And so he's brought to King Saul, and this is a conversation that David and Saul have. It's in 1 Samuel 17, 32 and 33. It says, "Don't worry about this Philistine," David said to Saul. "I'll go fight him." "Don't be ridiculous," Saul replied. "There's no way you can fight this Philistine and possibly win. You're only a boy, and he's been a man of war since his youth." Doesn't tell us David's age, but Saul says, "You're just a boy." So whatever that age that constitutes, David was not too young when he faced Goliath as a boy. When actually the king wouldn't do it, his big brother who, when Samuel saw him to anoint him, thought, "This is surely the one. This is he's tall, he's strong, he's handsome. This is the king." And He wouldn't go out and face Goliath, but David did. And with God's help, he was victorious. In 2 Chronicles 34, verses 1 through 3, we have another story of a young boy who does something great for Israel, for God. Josiah, it says in 2 Chronicles 34, verse 1, Josiah was only 8 years old when he became king. He reigned 31 years in Jerusalem. His was a good reign, as he carefully followed the good example of his ancestor, King David. For when he was 16 years old, in the 8th year of his reign, he began to search for the God of his ancestor David. And 4 years later, he began to clean up Judah and Jerusalem, destroying the heathen altars and the shame idols on the hills. So here we have Josiah. Comes to power because of the death of his father. He becomes the next king, but he's only 8. And I'm sure he had advisors, people that helped him in those early years, but he's the king. And when he's 16, it says, only 16, he commits his life to following God. He realizes that they as a nation, that they weren't following God, and so he tries to follow God. He finds the law. He digs into the law. He has the law given so that the people can know the law. And then he starts cleaning up the city and the land. And he starts getting rid of the idols that have filled Judah and Jerusalem. All at the tender age of starting at becoming king at 8, 16, turning to the Lord, and by age 20, making these amazing transitions and becoming one of the better, maybe the best, one of the best kings of Judah. So again, not too young. So being young doesn't mean you're unimportant. And so you are never, here's the final point, you are never too old or too young. Go to Psalm 71, verses 14 through 18. This is the same passage, the same chapter, the same psalm that earlier David had lamented, don't throw me aside when I'm old, don't desert me when my strength is gone. That was verse 9. We're going to pick up in verse 14. David continues, he says, I will never give up hope or stop praising you, speaking to God. All day long I will tell the wonderful things you do to save your people. But you have done much more than I could possibly know. I will praise you, Lord God, for your mighty deeds and your power to save. You have taught me since I was a child, and I never stop telling about your marvelous deeds. Don't leave me when I am old and my hair turns gray. Let me tell future generations about your mighty power. David says, I realize I'm old. My hair's getting gray. I'm getting, where I can't do what I used to do. Don't throw me away, God. But he says, here's the reality. I can still hope in you. I can still praise you, God, and I'm going to praise you out loud for the things that you do on a daily basis, the things you do to save us and provide for us. And he says, I've got a mission, and that mission is to tell future generations, to tell my children, to tell my grandchildren, and Lord willing, even to tell my great-grandchildren about how marvelous God is. Again, you're never too old. You can still serve God, no matter how old you are, no matter what you're doing. Can you continue, no matter where you are? If you're in the nursing home, can you still shine your light? Can you still pray to God? Can you still glorify God? Can you still tell others about how wonderful God is? It's been over 2 years since my mother passed away. And that was one of those long kiss goodbye situations. She developed Alzheimer's, had it for over 10 years. But even at the end, one of her favorite things was to say, this is what goes through my head. The song Step by Step. Oh God, you are my God, and I will ever praise you. I will seek you in the morning, and I will learn to walk in your ways. And she may not have got all the words correct, but she would say that again and again, reminding us. Why? Because you're never too old. And so you are never too old, listen to this, for God to use you. Go to Ecclesiastes 12, verses 1 through 7. Ecclesiastes 12, 1 through 7. It says, don't let the excitement of youth cause you to forget your Creator. Honor Him in your youth before you grow old and say, life is not pleasant anymore. Remember Him before the light of the sun, moon, and stars is dim to your old eyes, and rain clouds continually darken your sky. Remember Him before your legs, the guards of your house, start to tremble, and before your shoulders, the strong men stoop. Remember Him before your teeth, your few remaining servants, stop grinding, and before your eyes, the women looking through the windows see dimly. Remember Him before the door to life's opportunity is closed and the sound of work fades. Now you rise at the first chirping of the birds, but then all their sound will grow faint. Remember Him before you become fearful of falling and worry about danger in the streets, before your hair turns white like an almond tree in bloom, and you drag along without energy like a dying grasshopper, and the caperberry no longer inspires sexual desire. Remember Him before you near the grave, your everlasting home, when the mourners will weep at your funeral. Yes, remember your Creator now while you are young. Before the silver cord of life snaps and the golden bowl is broken, don't wait until the water jar is smashed in the spring and the pulley is broken at the well. For then the dust will return to the earth, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. Simple message to our young people. Yes, there's a lot in there about us older people, but it's telling the young people, it's telling you, you need to turn to God now. Don't wait. Don't look and say, well, when I get older, I'll commit to God. You know what? I want to enjoy my youth now, and then later I'll turn to God. Or, I've got plenty of time. I'll turn to God when I, am older. He's saying, you know what? The older happens really quickly. And before you know it, you haven't turned to God, and then it's too late. So you need to turn to God while you're still young. Listen, young people, you're not too young for God to use you. He can do amazing things. Think of David. Think of Josiah. Think of the little boy who shared his lunch that resulted in feeding 5,000 people. God can use every single one of us, no matter what our age is. As we wrap it up, Psalm 92, verses 12 through 15. Again, the question, does age matter? Listen to what this says. Righteous people flourish like palm trees and grow tall like the cedars in Lebanon. They are planted in the Lord's house. They blossom in our God's courtyards. Even when they are old, they still bear fruit. They are always healthy and fresh. Did you hear that? It's not talking about, it focuses on age, but it says, you know what? You can still be fruitful in old age. But listen, righteousness matters. That's what's important. Righteousness matters, not age. God wants us to have the right relationship with Him. God wants us to be right with Him. And so the invitation, God's calling each of us to follow Him. And if you're young, old, or anywhere in between, that invitation is for you. So the question, as we wrap things up, no matter whatever your age is, no matter what your too is, T-O-O, too tall, too short, too old, too young, no matter what it is, will you come and give yourself to Jesus? Like the song we sing, just as I am. That's what Jesus is calling you to come, just as you are. God bless, and I hope you realize God can use you no matter where you are in life, no matter how old you are. Have a wonderful week.